Hello. Today we're going to learn two things. First, we're going to learn how to use direct and indirect object pronouns together, and then we will learn why sometimes le can become se. Don't worry, everything is connected, so let's begin. But first, let's make sure you still remember how direct and indirect objects work in general. Let's begin with direct objects. As you hopefully remember, when we talk about direct objects, we talk about something that answers the questions what or whom. And indirect objects is something that answers the questions to whom or for whom. Both direct and indirect objects have their own pronouns that are used to replace direct and indirect objects, which helps us sound less repetitive. You can see all the pronouns on the screen right now. Luckily, most of them are exactly the same, except for the third person singular and plural forms. For the direct objects, we have lo and la, where lo is used to say him and la to say her. And for the indirect object pronouns, we have le, which could be used to say both to him and to her, depending on the context. Same exact thing happens in a third-person plural form, except here we're trying to replace more than one person or thing. Damn, that was a good recap. It is very important that you know and understand everything I have just described before we move forward. So if you need a bigger, much more detailed explanation of anything that has to do with the direct and indirect objects, you can watch two of my previous videos where we go in detail about everything. Some people watched those videos and said that they were not a complete shit. So there's that. Now it's time to combine everything we know about direct and indirect object pronouns. So let's take an example of Marcos trajo la comida a nosotros, which means Marcos brought the food for us, or Marcos brought us food. Let's take a deeper look. Marcos is a subject who performs the action of bringing something. What did he bring? He brought the food, right? Since the food answers the question what, it means the food, or la comida, is the direct object of this sentence. Now, we know that Marcos brought the food, but who did he bring the food to? Or rather, to whom did he bring the food? Marcos brought the food to us, which makes us, or nosotros, the indirect object of the sentence. I hope that makes sense. Again, if it doesn't make sense, I still love you, but you should not be watching this video. So now, since we've flawlessly identified the direct and indirect objects, how can we use our direct and indirect object pronouns to correctly replace la comida and nosotros? In the previous videos, we only had to deal with one type of object at a time. So for example, if we only focused on the direct object, we could transform the current sentence into Marcos la trajo a nosotros. Simple, right? We have just replaced la comida with la, which is a third-person direct object pronoun. We used la instead of lo because the word food in Spanish is feminine. You better remember that. Now, let's say we only focus on an indirect object pronoun. What we have for the same sentence is Marcos nos trajo la comida. As you can see, we've successfully replaced our indirect object nosotros with its corresponding indirect object pronoun nos. Now that we know exactly which pronouns we need in order to replace our direct and indirect objects with, it's time to see what's gonna happen when we combine them together. So our original sentence, Marcos trajo la comida a nosotros, becomes Marcos nos la trajo, which means Marcos brought it to us. As always, both direct and indirect object pronouns come before the verb. And when it comes to the order in which you should put the pronouns, I have some good news for you. Indirect object always comes before the direct object. That's the only thing you have to remember. There's no logic in it, just accept it. What I mean is, you cannot say Marcos la nos trajo. It's stupid and it's also incorrect. Don't be like that. The only reason why it may be confusing is that when it comes to translation, we have Marcos to us it brought, which is obviously not how we say it in English. But that's something that you'll have to internalize. It's not a big deal, I promise. We'll talk more about object placement at the end of the video. Now it's time to move to the second part of the video. Let's take a look at this sentence. Digo el cuento a María, which means I tell the story to Maria. Everything seems normal here at first. The story, or el cuento, is the direct object because it answers the question what. And since I'm telling the story to Maria, that makes Maria the indirect object because it answers the question to whom. I hope you understand that in order to replace el cuento, we have to use the pronoun lo, and to replace Maria, we'll have to use le. Knowing that information, I dare you to try to replace them in this current sentence. You have 3 seconds. What you have is probably le lo digo. Even though your heart and brain were in the right place, that is unfortunately incorrect. For some unholy reason, when the pronouns le or les are followed by lo, la, los or las, we have to change le or les to se. So the sentence le lo digo has to become se lo digo. It doesn't make any difference when it comes to translation, but this is grammatically correct. Or rather, there's no such thing as combining le or les with lo, la, los, or las. This is extremely important to understand right away. If you see anyone saying shit like le lo digo instead of se lo digo, that means he or she is either an absolute beginner in Spanish or an absolute moron in life. If you had trouble with Spanish señoritas recently, this is why. Now let's try to combine everything we've learned about direct and indirect object pronouns by going through a couple of examples. Example number 1. Mi mamá me compra una pizza. Mi mamá me la compra, which means my mom buys me a pizza. My mom buys it to me. Example number 2. No te quiero decir la verdad. No te la quiero decir. I don't want to tell you the truth. I don't want to tell it to you. Example number 3. Mi abuelo compró los regalos a los niños. Now, pause the video and replace, hopefully correctly, the direct and indirect objects in the sentence. You got this. Showing results in 3, 2, 1, boom. Mi abuelo se los compró. The direct object is los regalos, and the indirect object is los niños. That means we have to replace a los niños with les and los regalos with los. Since les and los don't exactly see eye to eye, it means that les will have to become se. If you just had the same exact thought process in your head, I want you to write in the comments whether you like pickles or not. Asking for a friend. Also, great job. We're almost done. Let's spend a couple of moments talking about the placement of direct and indirect object pronouns, just in case. As always, when there is only one verb in the sentence, you have to place both pronouns before the verb. But when we have two verbs together, we have two options. Either to place them before the first conjugated verb, or after the second verb, which should be in the infinitive form. The translation doesn't change. Both options are absolutely fine. Regardless of which option you choose, indirect object pronoun always comes before the direct one. Also keep in mind that when you add the pronouns to the end of the verb, you have to add the accent to the verb to maintain the proper word stress. If you don't do that, you'll automatically have to stress the second to last syllable, which is how it works by default in Spanish when the word ends on a vowel, but in this case that will be incorrect. So when we add pronouns to the end of the verb comprar, for example, it can only become comprármela and not comprármela. Now let's talk about affirmative and negative commands. With affirmative ones, we can only place pronouns after the verb. Dale la comida ahora, dásela. Don't forget that we change le to se only when both direct and indirect object pronouns are used together. In the first sentence, we are telling to give the food to someone, but the word food is not replaced by its direct object pronoun yet. Once we do replace it in the second sentence, only then le has to change to se. Also take note of the added stress in dásela. We cannot say dásela. Lastly, with the negative commands, you can only attach the pronouns before the verb, or rather between no and the verb. No me lo traiga. That's it for today. Combining both direct and indirect object pronouns can be tricky at first, but if you have a decent understanding of how both of them work separately, you will have to only remember two things. First, indirect object pronouns always come before the direct ones. And the second thing is when the pronouns le or les are followed by lo, la, los, or las, le or les will always have to become se. This is the fourth type of situation where se is used in Spanish. In next video, we'll cover the hardest type of se to understand, which I believe should be the last one. And then we'll finally be done with this bullshit. All the links are in the description. Don't be a stranger. Leave a comment down below. And thank you for watching.